One night, he learned the name of the man who had burned his entire life to the ground. And from that moment on, he had only one purpose left: to find him and put him in the grave. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. The smoke rose slowly, blending into the evening sky, painted in shades of purple and copper. The fresh scent of rain mixed with the sharp smell of the dying fire. The wind carried both across the wide plains. Elias let himself fall into the rhythm of his horse's steps. The weight of the 3-day journey rested on his shoulders, but the heavier burden was much farther away at the riverside camp, where the woman waiting for him, Lena, was. He pictured Lena's face, her hair blowing in the wind, the sparkle in her eyes both teasing and inviting. That image pushed his weariness aside, bringing an involuntary smile to his lips. The laughter of children rising from the camp, the gentle hum of women preparing food, the crackling of the fire. All of it signaled his return home. When Elias stopped his horse, Lena had already stepped closer. "You take longer to come back every time," she said, crossing her arms. "Almost like you enjoy stretching out your absence." He smiled faintly, nodding toward his saddlebag. "Maybe I just want to make the return sweeter." Lena rolled her eyes, unable to hide the smile tugging at her lips. "So what did you bring me?" Without a word, Elias pulled out a small, handcrafted silver necklace. In the center was a turquoise stone that would remind her of the riverbank where they had spent countless summer evenings as children. When she held it in her hand, the hardness in her eyes softened. "So you'll always remember," she murmured. That night, the camp was filled with joy. Fresh game meat from the hunt cooked slowly in the smoke, and the elders' stories echoed in the firelight. Yet Elias couldn't shake Lena's earlier words from his mind. Duty and honor are important. But when you're a leader, don't forget that you're still you. Her voice rang deep inside his heart. As the night went on, the wind carried a strange unease that left a chill at the back of Elias's neck. Lena's warmth was beside him, but somehow the air had gone quiet. Too quiet, until the distant pounding of hooves shattered it, replacing the silence with the cold echo of death. The first gunshot cut through the darkness like a blade. Screams, smoke, and flames erupted all at once. Men with their faces hidden behind bandanas stormed the camp on horseback. Elias ran, armed only with a knife. He took down the first attacker, but then his eyes found what he feared: Lena. She was in the grip of a tall man with a deep scar across his face. His name was known among outlaws with a curse: Jack Snake Eyes Mallory. A poisonous grin slid between his teeth. "Why would I let go of such a prize?" he said. "Let her go." Elias's voice thundered across the plains. Lena, masking her fear with courage, tried to break free. But another gunshot rang out. Time slowed. Elias watched as Lena's body fell, a crimson bloom spreading across her chest. He caught her in his arms, her warmth still clinging to him. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Moments later, her breath stopped. In that instant, every bit of light inside Elias went out. Darkness gave way to a blinding rage. By sunrise, the camp had become a graveyard. No one spoke. Elias buried Lena with his own hands, then stood. There was no going back now. All that remained was the sharp, cold road of vengeance. When he set out that morning, the wind carried Lena's name, and a single word, sworn in blood: revenge. After burying Lena, Elias didn't look back. The camp's ashes still drifted on the wind, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon. In these lands, blood never vanished without leaving a trace. And when men like Jack Snake Eyes Mallory passed through, they left behind not just blood, but the stench of arrogance. All Elias needed was to find that trail. The first day passed in silence. His horse moved with steady steps over the hard plain, while Elias studied every shadow, every stir of a bush, every shift in the stones. His gaze caught a glint on the rain-damp soil, and he stopped. A shard from a broken whiskey bottle, with fresh drops still clinging to the edges. This wasn't trash left by some passing traveler. It was from the kind of men who drank by the fire in the dark, their laughter loud and shameless. A few steps farther on, hoofprints were clear in the ground. The earth told him that at least 6 heavily loaded horses had passed this way. They were heading southeast. Elias's pulse quickened. This was the road taken by the men who spilled Lena's blood. As the days went by, the trail pulled him into harsher, more hostile terrain, rocky slopes, steep paths. The sky had turned gray with the weight of rain. Elias knew the dampness and the wind meant a storm was coming soon. But neither storm nor hunger could slow him. For him, there was only one storm, the storm of vengeance. On the evening of the 3rd day, he reached the ruins of a burned-out ranch. The beams were charred black, the walls collapsed. The smell of death still hung in the air. He dismounted and stepped quietly among the wreckage. There, he found the only man still clinging to life. The man's face was pale, his breath shallow, his eyes half closed. Elias knelt beside him. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice icy and calm. The man parted his lips, his voice barely a whisper. "Mallory. Snake Eyes. Took everything." "Which way?" The man's trembling finger pointed south. "Broken Horn Fort," he said, and took no more breaths. Elias closed the man's eyes. "May your soul rest," he murmured, though his own soul had long since lost any peace. Broken Horn Fort, a place of outlaws, hired guns, and people who had long ago sold their conscience to survive. There, blood flowed like water, and the only law was the law of the gun. Elias turned south and spurred his horse hard. The road was long, the food scarce, but determination fed him. Every mile brought him one step closer to Lena's grave marker. 3 days later, a trading post appeared at the end of a dusty road. A crooked wooden building with suspicious eyes peering from its windows. Horses tied out front, and inside, the smell of liquor, gambling, and bloody schemes. Elias dismounted. His knife was in its usual place, fitted to his hand like a natural part of him. When he walked in, the talk stopped. All eyes turned toward the strange warrior. At one table, a big man with half an ear missing bragged about how Mallory was living it up at Broken Horn, like a king. Elias stepped silently toward the table. "Where's Broken Horn?" he asked. The man let out a mocking laugh. "Why the hell should I dash?" Before he could finish, Elias's hand was around his throat. Tables crashed, glasses shattered. The quiet turned into a low murmur. Elias pressed his knife against the man's ribs. "Tell me." The man croaked. "South. 3 days. Near the canyon." When Elias let him drop to the floor, the air in the room grew heavier. He saw hands sliding toward gun grips. Then, a hand grabbed him sharply from behind. A tall woman with piercing eyes stood there. She wore a dusty hat and a heavy revolver at her hip. "If you plan on staying alive," she said, "you're coming with me. Because if you go to Broken Horn alone, no one will be left to even remember your name." Her name was Clara. She had her own score to settle with Mallory. And Elias was no longer alone on this road. When Elias and Clara slipped out the back door of the trading post and into the night, the wind carried the metallic scent of coming rain. The sky was thick with black clouds. The stars were hidden, the moon veiled as if behind a pale curtain. It was the kind of night outlaws loved, when tracks vanished more easily and sounds were smothered in the dark. Neither spoke. The steady rhythm of their horses' hooves beat against the dry ground. Clara kept her sharp gaze fixed on the horizon from beneath the shadow of her hat. "You don't say much," she remarked at last, her voice more curious than challenging. Without taking his eyes from the road, Elias replied, "Words don't kill." Clara gave a short laugh. "Relying only on the gun for justice. Not bad. But to take Mallory down, we'll need more than bullets." Elias studied her briefly. From the way she rode, the way her hand rested so naturally near her revolver, it was clear she wasn't just anyone. Whatever she'd endured with Mallory had honed her thirst for vengeance. But Elias didn't ask her story on the road to revenge. Everyone's wounds were silent. By midnight, they reached a river. In the darkness, the water twisted like a black snake, its current roaring with a sinister hum. Crossing it would be a gamble with death. Clara reined in her horse. "No other way," she said. "I'll go first," Elias answered, gripping the reins tightly. The water rose to his legs on the first step. After a brief hesitation, the horse began to swim against the current under his lead. The icy water bit into his muscles like a blade. Gritting his teeth, he made it to the far bank. Clara followed, her crossing rougher. At one point, her horse's hind leg slipped, and the current dragged at them both. She cursed under her breath, yanked the animal hard, and finally made it to shore. Raindrops clung to her hat, glittering faintly in the moonlight. "If this is just the start," Clara panted, "I don't want to think about what's waiting in Broken Horn." Elias didn't answer. The unease he felt wasn't something words could explain, it lived in instinct. The world had gone still. No crickets, no whisper of wind in the leaves. Only the distant murmur of the river behind them. Out of the darkness, 5 figures emerged. The moonlight caught the cold gleam of the rifles in their hands. Mallory's scouts. The first shot spat dirt at Elias's feet. Clara's revolver was in her hand. In an instant, one crack, and the lead man dropped. Elias lunged forward like lightning, driving his knife into a man's chest before knocking another's rifle aside. The dull thud of steel meeting bone echoed in the night. Clara slammed her elbow into the throat of a huge attacker who'd gotten too close, dazing him before dropping him with a single bullet. At that moment, Elias spotted a man in the shadows aiming a shotgun at her. Without thinking, he hurled his knife. The blade spun silently through the air and buried itself in the man's chest. Silence fell. The 2 remaining scouts, stunned, backed away before melting into the darkness. Smoke curled from the barrel of Clara's revolver as she looked at him. "This your plan? Charge in and hope you live." Elias yanked his knife free from the corpse. "It's worked so far." Clara shook her head with a faint smile. "You're insane. But maybe that's the kind of crazy that'll put Mallory in the ground." From one body's pocket, they pulled a crumpled map. It marked a narrow canyon route their target's path, the doorway to Broken Horn. As the rain began to fall in thin sheets, they mounted up. The canyon's dark walls loomed faintly in the distance. The wind blew cold, like a hand beckoning them inside. And Elias knew the road ahead would only get bloodier. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, the rain lay over them like a fine veil. Droplets slid down the rock faces, releasing a sharp scent of wet earth as they hit the ground. The canyon walls rose high, nearly blotting out the sky. It was the perfect place for an ambush. Elias and Clara pressed on, keeping their horses' steps quiet. Every shadow, every jagged edge was a potential threat in their eyes. The deeper they went, the more the sound was swallowed. Even the wind seemed unwilling to pass through. Only the drip of water and the steady breathing of the horses echoed in the gloom. Elias brushed his fingers along the hilt of his knife, his eyes in constant motion. Clara's right hand rested on her revolver, and with a tilt of her head, she motioned forward. At the end of the narrow pass, a faint, flickering glow appeared. The light rose from a cluster of warped wooden buildings. Broken Horn was worse than the stories had painted it. This was a place that had never known the word law. Rotting boards, sagging roof beams, mud-choked streets. The faces moving through the open spaces kept their hands close to their weapons and their backs to the wall. Here, trust was a foreign language. Elias leaned toward Clara and spoke in a low voice. "We split. You get inside and gather information. I'll come in from the back." She looked him over. "You're really thinking of going straight for Mallory alone? If you die, my revenge stays unfinished. Don't worry about me," Elias said with a cold half-smile. Clara guided her horse toward the saloon, the shadow of her hat hiding her face, a whiskey bottle in her hand giving her the look of any ordinary customer. Elias slipped around to the rear, tying his horse behind the stables and melting into the shadows. He leaned against the saloon's side wall, listening. Laughter, curses, the clink of glasses. The heavy scent of whiskey tangled with tobacco smoke. But then he heard something else, say, deep, resonant laugh. The moment it reached him, every muscle tightened. Jack Snake Eyes Mallory was inside. The back door's lock was nothing but a simple latch. Elias slid the tip of his knife into the gap and twisted lightly. A soft click, and the door swung open to a dim corridor. The low light cast long shadows across the dusty floor. Just then, a drunken man stumbled out from a side room. Elias clamped a hand over his mouth and pressed the blade to his throat. Moments later, the man's body crumpled soundlessly to the floor. Inside, the mood shifted. The saloon's main door had opened. Clara had walked in. "Whiskey," she called out. As she waited for the glass, she strolled toward Mallory's table. The man looked up, the crooked grin beneath his scar cutting across his face. "Not many women pass through here," he said. Clara took a sip, meeting his gaze. "Most of them are smart enough not to." A few men at the table laughed, but Mallory didn't. He leaned back slowly. You lost your way. Clara set the glass down hard. No, I found you. The saloon exploded in an instant. Elias stepped through the back into the main room, spotting Mallory through the chaos. Guns were drawn, tables overturned. The first bullet shattered bottles behind the bar, the air filling with the mixed sting of whiskey and gunpowder. Clara rolled behind the counter, dropping two men with quick, sharp shots. Elias charged toward Mallory. The outlaw raised his gun, but Elias's knife slashed a deep line across his arm. Mallory's grin twisted into a snarl. Is that all you've got? He roared. Elias didn't answer. His eyes burned with the memory of Lena's last look before she fell. This moment was sealed with that memory and the promise of vengeance. The saloon reeked of blood and smoke. In the chaos, the collision between Elias and Mallory was now inevitable. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the saloon's air. The flames of the oil lamps flickered, and the whiskey spilled from shattered bottles mingled with the blood soaking into the floor. Screams, the scraping of chairs, and gunfire blended into a single roar, but none of it reached Elias. His focus was locked on the crooked grin beneath the deep scar on Mallory's face. Mallory, clutching his wounded arm, backed away, though a mocking gleam still lit his eyes. A half-made fighter like you thinks he's sending me to my grave? He taunted. Elias moved closer, his voice low. I came to remind you of Lena's name. The mockery faded from Mallory's face. His jaw tightened. A heartbeat of silence, then he charged like a bull, his hand still gripping his pistol. The barrel swung toward Elias's chest, but Elias seized his wrist and shoved it upward. The gun went off, sending wood splinters raining from the ceiling. They crashed onto an overturned table. Mallory's bulk pressed down, trying to crush him, but Elias drove his knee hard into the outlaw's gut. Mallory's breath hitched, yet he recovered quickly and swung the pistol like a club. The metal split the skin above Elias's brow, warm blood clouding his vision. Blinking past it, Elias pulled back, then lunged forward with a flurry of blows to Mallory's ribs. The bigger man staggered, slamming into the edge of the table. From behind the bar, Clara rose and dropped two more men with quick shots before throwing Elias a sharp glance. Finish him, she shouted. Elias spotted his knife on the floor. So did Mallory. They both dove for it, but Elias was faster. His hand closed around the cold hilt, and he lunged. Mallory threw up his arms to block, but the blade sliced his arm before driving into his chest. Mallory's face shifted from shock to fury. One hand clamped on Elias's throat, the other straining to push the knife away. Elias planted his knees on the floorboards, pouring every ounce of strength into his arms. The light in Mallory's eyes began to flicker. A gunshot cracked. Mallory's head jerked to the side. Clara stood behind him, revolver still aimed. His death doesn't belong to you alone, she said coldly. Elias shoved the blade deeper. Mallory gave a guttural gasp before his legs buckled. Blood spilled from his mouth as his gaze emptied into nothing. The man who had dealt in years of pain, death, and fear was now just a lifeless heap on the floor. The saloon fell into silence. The few men left standing made for the doors. Others writhed on the ground in pain. Clara lowered her gun barrel and looked at Elias. Did you get what you wanted? Elias stared at Mallory's corpse. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, only a deep, hollow exhaustion. No, he murmured. Behind the bar, an oil lamp had toppled. Flames began to spread across the whiskey-soaked floor, racing toward the wooden walls with a crackle. We need to get out of here, Clara said. Elias gave Mallory's face one last look, then turned away. They headed for the door. Outside, the night air was cold, the sky clear, almost peaceful after the choking chaos inside. As flames roared up behind them, Elias swung into his saddle. Clara did the same. Where to now? She asked. Elias looked to the horizon. I don't know, but this road isn't finished. As the flames devoured the dark streets of Broken Horn, the crackle of collapsing timbers spread through the night like an ominous melody. Sparks flared briefly in the sky like dying stars, while smoke pooled into the canyon as a thick, gray shroud. Every falling roof beam felt like the final sentence of the many dirty stories this place had held. From his saddle, Elias looked back for a long moment. Mallory's lair was nothing but ash now. But there was no triumph in him, only an unending emptiness. Lena's laughter still echoed faintly in his ears. Her final look burned fresh into his mind like an open wound. Death had brought justice, but not peace. Clara rode up beside him, her eyes catching the flicker of the flames. "This place won't hurt anyone anymore," she said. Elias gave a slight nod. "But it won't bring back the ones it hurt before." "That's what revenge is," Clara replied quietly. "When it's done, all you're left with is ash." The wind carried the sharp scent of burning wood as it passed them. Neither spoke as they guided their horses toward the mouth of the canyon. Moonlight slid over broken stones, and water dripped softly from cracks in the rock. With every step, the hiss of the fire faded further into the distance. Outside the canyon, the sky was clear. The stars shone silently, as if unaware of the bloody night beneath them. On the horizon, a long, empty road stretched away. Where it led, neither Elias nor Clara knew, but both understood it could never return to what the past had taken. They stopped on the slope of a hill. Elias dismounted and knelt, pressing his palms together in a moment's prayer, just as he had the day he buried Lena. Clara watched without a word, understanding that he would never put the weight he carried into speech. When Elias rose, there was a new steadiness in his face. "What will you do now?" Clara asked. "I don't know," Elias said. "Maybe mourn what I've lost. Maybe stand by the ones still living." Clara smiled faintly. "Then this journey doesn't end here." The wind swept across the plains, lifting their hair gently. They mounted up again. Behind them, the flames had already begun to die, leaving only smoke and soot. Ahead stretched silence, uncertainty, and perhaps the shadow of new stories. Elias tugged lightly on the reins, steering his horse forward. Lena's name slipped from his lips like a fading whisper. The road awaited them, and now it was not just the road of vengeance, but the road of survival. And so, two lonely souls rode toward the horizon, fading into the darkness. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.